Welcome, David, to our Leaders Who Care series. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Mark. I appreciate it.
Well, anytime I can get a Miamian back in the groove here where I spent 22 years, and at the same time, not be suffering through the humidity while I'm in LA, it's perfect for me.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah,
and that is, I know it's not a real background, but that is a real background.
that is. Yeah, that's the view from my deck. So it's lovely. We love it here.
Yeah, how can you not love that? I tell you. So, well, if we could start by, as most things like this, first introducing yourself. We'll get to the business part in a bit, but a little bit about you, where you're from originally, where you are now, which we kind of gave a hint to, family. I usually ask people, and I get surprised sometimes, something you've never told anybody and you want to reveal to the world now. That's usually pretty interesting. Things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. Grew up outside of DC in Northern Virginia. Went to West Point and was in the Army. And for a few years after that, went to business school. Spent about 30 years in private equity, and most of that at Apex Partners, which is a global private equity fund. Just retired from that last year and have been focused on two things, which is running my charity, which we'll talk about, Fallen Patriots, and then also investing in the defense technology world personally. And then I'm on the board of a defense tech high-powered microwave weapons company as well. And so that's kind of my personal pursuits in terms of or professional rather. In terms of personal pursuits, I've been married for 27 years. We have 4 adult kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. The boys are Army and Navy respectively. The girls are seniors in college. One's at West Point, so she'll be in the Army, and then the other is at UPenn.
What is she studying?
She's studying econ, so she's doing a consulting gig at this summer here in Miami.
Well, did you have a whole strategy session when they were 3 or something?
Yeah, right. No, we tell them they're the most, they've been super blessed, so they have a lot of responsibility. They've got to pay it forward.
Good job. I love that. And you managed 2 and 2. This is like almost too well planned.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We've been blessed.
And what happens at the Army Navy game? What goes on then in the household?
Well, it's funny. My son is the Navy guy. He was raised going to Army games, so he said he's going to stay loyal to Army during the Army Navy football game, which makes it easier.
No, yeah, it does make it's always a fun competition. So speaking of kids, and I've got adult kids too, what were you like as a kid or a teenager? Were you like I grew up in Montreal, so we built snow forts as part of and threw them at each other, or we had lemonade stands, or did you play sports, music? What were you like?
Yeah, I played football through my life, young life. I didn't play in college or anything, but football was kind of my main thing. I studied a lot. I grew up in a single family household. My mom worked 3 jobs and raised me and my sister. Yeah, it was pretty tough home. So mostly I was focused on getting really good grades so I could get myself through college. My folks couldn't really afford it, so I had to do it myself. And that's what I was mostly focused on, is trying to get out of there.
Were you the oldest?
I was, yeah.
Oh, cool. So you were like part kid, part dad, if you will.
I don't know about that, but just, I was definitely very focused on, getting out of there. So I had to figure out a way to do that, and West Point was my way to do that.
Well, I went to go to West Point. You studied, I think you have a bachelor's in East Asian Studies. Why
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Back then you couldn't major. You had so many math, science, engineering courses that you really had almost not much time for anything else. So the most you could do was a concentration. So that's what I did. So I really enjoyed the math, science, and engineering. And of course, it was very heavy on military history and military science as well. But I realized I was a little bit of a history geek as a kid growing up. I didn't really know much about China. And as one of the world's leading powers, at one point, it certainly wasn't back then, but at one point it had been. And so I wanted to really learn a lot more about that. So I took Chinese language and then learned a lot of Chinese history as well. And this was in the late 80s.
You speak Mandarin?
No. I spoke it a little bit at the time, but it's incredibly hard language. And the
You
second
think?
you stop studying it, it goes away very quickly. So
And you have to be good at art and graphics at the same time.
yes, exactly.
So you then joined the Army. What were you envisioning that led you to go to your MBA at Harvard?
I didn't even know Harvard existed. My mom was a school teacher. My dad was a journalist. And so, I didn't know anything about the business world. I just, when I was in the service, I had a great experience there in the service. We went to combat in Panama in '89. So that was gratifying to do something productive in that role. And I was in the service during the Gulf War, but we did not get deployed to the Gulf War. And as I was thinking about what I was going to do next, that's how one of my commander's wife, his wife went to HBS in Harvard, and that's how I first learned about it. And I decided, you know what, that sounds like a pretty good place to learn about the business world and decide what comes next.
Yeah, no kidding. I remember I was in Miami when the whole Noriega thing was going on. Was that before your time?
No. So '89, that's when we captured Noriega. So he was in power at that point and using us, as an excuse to repress the Panamanian people. Of course, he was very corrupt, doing a lot of drug running and laundering and money laundering and so forth. And finally, he killed an American officer, and his troops did at a checkpoint, and that was it. So Bush pushed the button, and then we were there already on the ground, and we took out a Panamanian Marine company that was nearby, and that was our objective. And as a part of Operation Just Cause in '89, and then ultimately arrested him and put him in prison.
Well, that was amazing. Thanks for all your service, including that one. I remember that was a major deal, especially in Miami.
Yeah. Back then it was, because there hadn't been a war really since Vietnam, Grenada as well, and Panama.
Right.
So there really weren't that many hot conflicts, but it was gratifying because the Panamanian people absolutely hated him.
Yeah.
And when we did it, they were coming out in the streets celebrating. It was like liberating France, and these desperately poor people that lived in wooden tenements with open sewers in front of their tenements were coming out trying to give us food. And we're like, no, please take our food. And so it felt great to be a part of that tradition of the American military, where I've heard it said we've conquered more land than any empire in the history of humanity, but we've never held on to hardly any of it. So it's nice to do that.
Yeah, it is interesting, and the world gets more interesting by the minute. But that's another video
Yeah,
conversation for sure.
yeah.
There's often, especially in what I do, we're very involved in talent and leadership development. There's often a stereotype for veterans entering the business world. I find it's like, and it's changing obviously, but it's like you're good at logistics or you're a good leader, but you're so structured that maybe you won't be good for entrepreneurship and stuff like this, rather than looking at the individual. Can you share what intrigued you about and how you secured opportunity in the private equity world, where you came to the point where you built a long, successful career as an equity partner and a co-head of investor relations at Apex? Can you put all that together for me?
Yeah, well, when I went to business school, so I graduated in '94. There was no such thing as a big veterans hiring focus among business, and so it was a challenge, right? People would sort of the unspoken attitude was, well, you haven't run numbers at an investment bank for a few years, you're not a consultant. What am I going to do with you? And my pitch to them was always, look, yeah, I haven't run numbers, but a monkey can learn to do that. You give them enough time, you're going to figure it out. What you can't teach is those softer skills that are very hard to master, which you do learn in the military, which is how to influence, how to work through influence, how to lead in tough situations, how to make decisions based on incomplete information and do risk management. And it's hard for civilians to appreciate that, but as veterans, we all know that's the case. So yeah, there is a bit of the stereotyping, of pigeonholing, if you will, to go into manufacturing management or logistics or whatever.
Right.
I gotta say, after a lot of years in Wall Street and having rubbed elbows with a lot of veterans, that's the kernel of every stereotype generally has some basis in reality. And yeah, there's a lot of veterans that are really structured and they can't really think that far out of the box. I mean, that's just the reality. And so, but that's not everybody.
Plus, there's so much skills training going on right now, maybe more than ever,
Yeah.
that you can learn a certain skill. And for that matter, you don't necessarily have to go to college. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but you don't necessarily have to, and you can have a great life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But there's certainly a lot of veterans that have been spectacularly successful as entrepreneurs. And it's just like anything, you can't make these sweeping generalizations of whole classes of people. So,
Yeah, it's to say that's an understatement, I guess I would say,
right.
because I mean, we've put people, veterans, in positions like head of digital transformation, or CFOs, VP, whatever type of thing. And you're on. I think you went on mute there a little bit.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So I agree. For everything, you can't do generalizations. It never works, and it just creates problems. You mentioned soft skills. We've actually changed the name of that. We didn't ask anybody's permission, but we changed the name of that to high skills, which stands for human intelligence.
Hmm.
And I'd love to get your thoughts on that. We did it because soft sometimes was looked upon as a fluffy type of skill in the
Yeah.
past. And with AI coming on strong, and we'll chat about that, leadership's going to have to change a little bit too, with respect to how they lead, how people lead, and how they engage employees that even maybe will lose their jobs to AI to can take on other opportunities, maybe through special skills training. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like that high skills because it is difficult to learn. And I must say, one thing that people in the civilian world don't appreciate about the military is that the military is full of a lot of very genuine servant leaders who really care and go way out of their way to check and see how you're doing, to see how you can be helpful, to really try to support and train people. And that, in the finance world, at least, that just doesn't exist, right? Some places are really hard where people are elbowing each other and pushing their head on the water. In most cases, it's just everyone's in the pool and okay, I hope you can swim. And that's great if you can. If you can't, okay, there's someone else who will. And so it's very much fend for yourself. And that example of leadership that exists is just it's incredible in the Army, and most civilians never see it. So I got to say that is something that really makes a huge difference and is very, very hard to learn. It's not a soft skill. It has a tangible impact on big organizations.
Yeah, 100%. And for that matter, even in startups and growing organizations, we find the thing that very often derails everything is founders arguing amongst themselves or with the investors and not knowing how to handle conflict, which for that you do need high skills.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and being able to constructively handle conflict is a very important skill and very rare one. I like the Ray Dalio approach of just being very open and transparent, maybe not at the same radical level of transparency, but I like the overall obligation to be candid and have dissenting views and just searching for the truth. And by vigorous debate, we'll find the closest thing to that truth.
Will you run for office, please? There's an expression that I've always loved. It's clear is kind. And the clearer you are, for real, the kinder you are, because if it's not clear, the other person doesn't get it, and you're
Yeah,
not kind to anybody at the end of the
right.
day. And there's another program we support a lot from, I call them social profits because I don't like the term non-profits, and it's a program called Nonflict. It's the only non I do allow. And it talks a little bit what you're saying, where it coaches people on how to conflict is not a bad thing per se. It might be just different ideas, and then
Right.
active listening, and they really pound on active listening to get to a best case scenario of how to move forward, even if you still don't totally agree.
Right.
But you get into a mindset where you learn the other person or the persons really felt they were heard for real.
Yeah.
And then you go ahead and I like the term nonflict. I thought it was it's a great term in itself. So you're right on, in my opinion, there. The fourth industrial revolution, has always been talked about as being technology, and now it's even more defined with AI, virtual reality, and you know, I mean, super fast moving like we've never seen. Um, the fifth industrial revolution, they're being talked about as humanity, and we like to focus on how impact and talent come together. Um, how have you evolved with the speed of technology and especially AI when you're at Apex and now you're on a board as an advisor in the defense sector? Um, you know, startups sometimes start and then next week they're out of date because something else came up and you're making investments and this and that and the other. How have you seen it, and how has it changed you a little bit?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I wasn't a tech investor myself at Apex. Apex as a whole did a lot of tech investing and is probably our strongest sector. So we were always involved there, but I stayed, close to it and very close to the military world, given a lot of friends that I have that are still in uniform and, a big personal self-study over many, many years in military science and geopolitics and history and so forth. And so, what's really interesting to your question is the rapidity at which technology is revolutionizing warfare. I do think we are at the threshold of another revolution in military affairs that 10 years down the road, it would be very apparent. You're seeing inklings of it now, but we're going to fight in radically different ways, in the same way that the aircraft carrier replaced the battleship, and the way that the tank and the radio and integration with air power replaced artillery and massed infantry attacks in World War I and so forth. So there's going to be a fundamentally different way to fight, and so that's where I focus this next leg of my career, is in that area. And so it's been a lot of fun to get up to speed, around all these new technologies. So the company that I'm on is Epirus, which is high powered microwave weapons. And so, as an example, what you see now is these drone swarms, right, that are coming. They're not true drone swarms, but many drones that are very expensive to shoot down. You have to shoot them down one at a time. It's uneconomical, and you can see a future where there's going to be thousands of these things flying at you. And so the way we just don't have effective ways to shoot them down. So what Epirus does is it emits a beam of high power microwaves out in an arc that overwhelms the electronic circuits of whatever it hits. And so if it's 1,000 drones or one drone that gets hit, they're going down. They're going to stop functioning. And so you can see it's a radically different way to fight. And you can apply this to offensive use cases down the road and all different domains, sea and air, as well as land and so forth. So anyway, that's just one example, and there are many others as well that are happening out there in the defense technology world.
You know, the first thing that popped into my mind when you said that was a mosquito killer type of thing, where the mosquitoes are drawn to the
Yeah.
thing, and when you put out that arc, and I saw a rerun of a Star Trek show recently where they were talking about, maybe they put it on purpose because they were talking about a planet that they reached, that they handled war differently, where they agreed that they would do the war on computers, and but there would be no property damage or blood or anything. It's a scary thing. And when they hit an area, anybody in that area then had to report to some kind of chamber, gas chamber, to die.
I remember seeing that. I was a Star Trek kid too. So yeah, leave it to Hollywood to come up with some silly thing like that, but entertaining thought anyway.
Well, and scary in a way. Like, would that be considered a clean war and a way to go?
Yeah, I mean, humans are humans, and yeah, we have a lot of tech, but at the end of the day, war is going to be about, unfortunately, beating your enemy into submission. And the typical way you do that is by killing people until they just can't take it anymore.
Yeah, it's all bad. You know, we found that our firm, based on the premise that leaders in their organizations, whatever their organizations are, will always do better when doing good. And it's come to fruition many, many times. And thankfully, more and more leaders are seeing the economic value of doing good at the same time. And I want to use that as a segue to talk about, Children of Fallen Patriots Foundation, which I think is amazing, not just because you're here, but amazing and needed and required. Was there a specific story or situation, or was it just general of who you are, of inspiration for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So December 20th, 1989, we were given the mission to do Operation Just Cause down in Panama. And so we engaged the enemy at that point. Unfortunately, Sergeant Delaney Gibbs was killed in action, and he had a baby daughter due. So he was killed a few days before Christmas, and he had a daughter due in March. So he was the only member of our battalion who was killed. I didn't know him personally, but he was the only one who was killed. And so they hit all of us pretty hard. And I just kept thinking about his daughter and who's going to take care of her one day. And of course, there are many thousands of kids like her in the ensuing years that lose parents, not only from combat, but from training accidents, from suicide, from illness. So any line of duty death is what we cover. And our mission is to send those kids to college, because at the end of the day, every parent wants their kid to have a bright future, and college education is the key to that. So we felt like that was the best way we could honor our fallen heroes, is to take care of the people they love most in the world, which are their kids.
Yeah, like it's what a burden off the shoulders of the man or woman that's left behind, or the kids that are left behind to do that. Can you describe, I want to go more into that, but can you describe how some of your experiences, what you learned both in the service and the PE potentially arenas, that gave you a vantage point as co-founder and CEO to make an impact for military children and their families?
Yeah, it's funny. It really came together. My many worlds came together in service of the Fallen Patriots mission, from Wall Street, from the finance, from the investment, from the fundraising experience, from my military roots, even from the local communities that we lived in Greenwich, Connecticut, which is very generous, full of generous people, and New York City and so forth. So yeah, I mean, we did very much approached it as a business problem, and did actually a Harvard Business School case study with a couple of students to analyze the space. What's the size of the need? Who are the capital providers out there? Does the world need another scholarship making organization? We found that it did, because it's highly fragmented. And in terms of the providers, they're very small by and large, highly fragmented, and it's very hard for them to find the students because of privacy laws and so forth. And so capital can't find kids, and kids can't find capital. And so was our mission, is to, number one, provide that capital so they could complete their college education. So there are government funds, but we supplement that to plug the gap. And then secondly, to find all those students and create the biggest database in the industry, which we have done. And so there's somewhere around 25,000 students that have lost somebody over the last 30 something years. We have, I think, the biggest database. We have over 13,000 of those students' names in our database, which is, because we've been a focus factory for 22 years, that's how we've been able to build this thing. And it is, very valuable to be able to stay in touch with those families.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine seeing them grown up, and I don't know who said it, but so there's, who knows how many Einsteins are out there that are not getting a chance to be Einsteins, whether it's from hunger or getting killed in war or whatever, and seeing some of them later and what they become and the contribution they make, incredibly makes it all worth the while.
Yeah, they really are inspiring students, and so we love helping them.
How do you engage corporates? Because again, we work a lot with impact and talent, where showing them that the impact they can make, whatever the impact they want to make, and the talent they have, they can see the value of their financial support or even other support. They've got different budgets they can take from. They got philanthropy they can take from. How do you get engaged with them, and how do they see the economic value as well as just if it's only philanthropy?
Yeah, so corporate funders are a huge part of our revenue base, and it's Fortune 500 companies like Casey's General Stores and PepsiCo and
Yeah.
Citigroup and RBC and Goldman Sachs and so forth. So it is really big. I think the corporate world in general, especially in the U.S., places a lot of value on being good members of society, and contributing back to, especially to the areas where they operate. And so yeah, I mean, they all have different missions. So some of them just may not be interested in this area because they're doing sports or healthcare or whatever. But, I admire everything that's being done. But certainly the combination of supporting children, supporting education, supporting veterans, that intersection of all those three is of appeal to a lot of people. And so there's the financial support that they provide for the scholarships, but also a lot of professional opportunities. So we have career seminars where we bring our students in to learn about various career paths they may not be aware of. And it's quite valuable. 80% of our students are from enlisted families. And so they may or may not know about the world of consulting and hedge funds and so forth. That's valuable. And then they go on to have internship and full-time employment opportunities with our corporate partners as well.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because it does become valuable then for the company, but then it also makes employees a lot of times proud of what their company's doing, and
That's right.
that's a play as well. So that's awesome to hear. We just started a whole pipeline of what we're calling the present future leaders who care, because the future leaders who care are starting to do it already in the present type of thing, even as young as 8 to 10 year olds, up to 18 year olds that are doing amazing things, from starting a company to writing books and whatnot. So I would invite you, if there's any young people that have gone through your program that are, they don't have to start a company, but they're doing an initiative, they're making a difference out there and whatnot, that we can highlight, bring them on. We'd love to do that.
Okay, wonderful. I'd love to. We have a bunch of really stellar students out there.
I bet. Um, we say in LA, you should keep them wanting more so you can do a sequel. So we may have to do a sequel and maybe it'll include those kids. But one last question here. A client told me in 2021, he said about the year 2020, it was the year that flew by slowly. And I've always remembered that, because it seems sometimes like COVID was yesterday and then multiple years ago, all at the same time. So now we're 3 years, 4 years later. We're well into 2024. What are you most grateful for, and what are you most hopeful for?
So grateful. It's a great question. I've just been fortunate to be blessed in many ways, to have had, the ability to retire at a relatively young age. I mean, I'm not retiring, but it's more like just shifting gears and doing a lot more of what I want to do, which is a lot of fun. I've been blessed with a great wife and marriage, and four, wonderful kids who are doing really great things out there, and a lot of great friends, and my health and everything. So I guess, be very grateful for all that hope, that's in our life, whether that's in our family or professional endeavors or fallen patriots. It's just, it's very, very rewarding existence. So I'm grateful for that.
Well, I'm grateful that you're a leader who cares, for sure. So thanks for that, and and a new friend, hopefully, and any way that we can support as well. And I'm super hopeful because the kids you're putting out, I know are going to do some great stuff in the future, and that's something to be hopeful for, as always. So thanks for sharing and being on our series.
Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate it.